The screaming lasted 11 seconds. Then it stopped, and that was worse. Lieutenant Priya Anand had been on duty at the United Earth Communications Array for 6 years, and in that time she had learned to sleep with her eyes open during the graveyard shift, a trick of stillness that let her look alert while her mind drifted somewhere warmer. She was 3,000 miles into that drift, coffee going cold at her elbow, when the console in front of her lit up red for the first time in her career. Not amber. Not yellow. Red. By the time she'd blinked the fog out of her eyes, the system had already flagged the incoming transmission, encrypted it 3 times over, rerouted it through 4 separate relays, and stamped it with a classification she'd only ever seen in training simulations, Blaglass. A designation that hadn't been used in 12 years. Not since the Halyard incident, which nobody in the government liked to discuss above a whisper. She set the coffee down. She never picked it up again. The message was 41 seconds long. It contained no words, only sound. The sound of 286 children screaming, cut off mid-breath into absolute silence, followed by a voice that did not belong to anything human. We have taken your young. Consider this a courtesy. A demonstration of your place in the order of things. Do not respond. Do not pursue. Further colonization of the Aldebine corridor will be answered the same way. You are guests in this galaxy. Guests do not expand. Guests do not breed beyond their station. Be grateful we left you the adults. The signal died. For 30 seconds, nothing in the comm center moved except the blinking console lights and a curl of steam rising off an abandoned mug. Then Lieutenant Anand picked up the emergency line and called the Secretary-General of the United Earth Council. The Secretary-General listened to all 41 seconds without a word. When it ended, she asked exactly one question. Who are they? The Crivane Ascendancy, ma'am. A pause that lasted precisely 4 seconds. Get me Admiral Cross. And wake Dr. Solis, tell her to bring her team. Which team, ma'am? She has 3. The quiet one, the Secretary-General said. The one that doesn't have a name. The Crivane Ascendancy spanned 51 star systems and had been spacefaring for over 6,000 years. Their warships moved in formations that looked disturbingly alive, organic, coiling, built from a biosynthetic alloy grown rather than forged. Their command structure was ancient, rigid, and built on a single unshakable philosophy, dominance through force so overwhelming that resistance never occurred to anyone twice. They had conquered 9 species. They had erased 3. They had watched humanity crawl out of its home system 40 years earlier with the mild, amused contempt of a wolf watching a house cat wander past the tree-line. Primitive. Emotional. Soft. So when the Ascendancy took the children of Ashgrove Colony, it wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was punctuation. A clean political sentence: humans would withdraw from the Aldebine corridor, and humans would learn their place. In 6 months, perhaps a year, the children would be returned, shaken, changed, but breathing. The Ascendancy had used this technique before. It always worked. What the Crivane Ascendancy did not know, could not have known, was what humanity had spent 12 years quietly building in the wake of Halyard. What humanity had decided, in the silence of that old wound, it would become if a day like this one ever came again. The galaxy was about to learn that nothing is more dangerous than a species that has stopped being afraid. Admiral Elena Cross was 62 years old and had the bearing of a woman who had never once allowed herself to slouch, not even in grief. She stood at the head of the war table aboard the UES Halcyon, a ship whose existence was formally denied in 19 separate international treaties, and studied the 12 faces around her. Generals. Scientists. Intelligence chiefs. The sharpest strategic minds humanity had ever assembled. Nobody was crying. Not because nobody wanted to. Because each of them, at some point in their career, had already made peace with what they were willing to become to protect the people they served. 286 children, said General Marcus Reyes, commander of the ground forces, his voice level as a blade laid flat. Ages 3 to 16. Taken from Ashgrove Colony 9 hours ago. The colony's adult population was left untouched. The colony itself was left standing. This was deliberate. A message, said Dr. Amara Solis. Small, soft-spoken, dressed in civilian clothes that somehow carried more weight than any uniform in the room. She held no rank. She'd never needed one. They wanted us to know exactly what happened, and exactly why. The ascendancy speaks in demonstration. This is their grammar. They expect us to understand it. We understand it, Cross said. The question is what we say back. They told us not to respond, someone said from the far end of the table. Colonel Dana Voss, intelligence, looked at the speaker with an expression that wasn't quite a smile. They told us not to respond the way they expect. They've staged 3 carrier groups along the corridor. Send warships, they engage, they destroy us, keep the children, and prove their point twice over. So we don't send warships, Solis said. No. Cross pulled up a star map. The Aldebine corridor, the Ascendancy fleet positions, and one small pulsing marker on the far side that no one outside this room had ever seen. We send them something else entirely. Silence settled over the table. The Nightglass Protocol, Reyes said. Not a question. The Nightglass Protocol, Cross confirmed. 12 years in development. Never fielded. Never used against a living civilization. She looked around the table. I want objections now, before we go any further. This is the moment to raise them. No one spoke, not because there were no objections, but because every person in that room had spent 12 years helping build the thing she was describing, and each had, in their own way, already made their peace with it. Dr. Solis. Where is Ascendancy High Command right now? Solis opened her tablet. The Sovereign Chorus, all 51 senior Crivane commanders, convened 3 days ago for their standing strategic review. They're still there. Waiting to see what we do. Good, Cross said. Let's tell them. Internally, within the sealed, air-gapped servers of the project, it had no official name. Engineers had taken to calling it Nightglass the way you'd name a stray cat you weren't supposed to keep. It wasn't a weapon, not exactly. It wasn't software, not exactly. It was an idea, weaponized. In 40 years among the stars, humanity had learned one truth above all others: every spacefaring civilization runs on information. Sensor grids. Command relays. Navigation lattices. The more advanced the civilization, the more completely its survival depended on systems nobody ever thought to question. The Crivane Ascendancy, 6,000 years old, was the most deeply integrated civilization humanity had ever encountered. Its entire empire moved through something called the Chorus Lattice, a faster-than-light data web binding all 51 systems into a single nervous system. Without it, fleets lost coordination. Supply chains collapsed. Command went dark. Nightglass had spent 12 years learning to speak the Chorus's language. It was ready to say something the Ascendancy would never forget. The Sovereign Chorus met in the Hall of Unbroken Victory, a chamber 4,000 years old, its walls hung with the banners of every species the Ascendancy had defeated, absorbed, or erased. Grand Commander Vel Thren sat at its head and allowed himself something close to satisfaction. The operation had gone flawlessly. The human children were secure on Ascendancy Station Ashkur, fed, unharmed, entirely beyond human reach. The human fleet hadn't moved. Let them sit with their helplessness. Let them exhaust themselves in counsel and posturing. In 6 months they'd send diplomats, and Thren would make them wait 3 more before naming terms. It was clean. It was efficient. It was how the Ascendancy had always done things. Then the lights went out. Not dimmed. Extinguished. Total darkness across the entire hall of unbroken victory. Personal comm implants, which should have provided light, gave nothing. Backup power, which should have engaged within a third of a second, didn't. 51 of the galaxy's most powerful military commanders sat perfectly still, because every one of them had learned, over long careers, that stillness was survival when you didn't yet know what you were facing. Then the screens came back. Not the tactical displays, not the star charts. Those stayed dark. What lit up were the small personal terminals at each commander's seat, used for private correspondence during formal session. Every single one showed the same image, a woman's face. Silver hair pulled back with military precision. Eyes very dark, very calm. Grand Commander Vel Thren. My name is Admiral Elena Cross, United Earth Space Forces. I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen, because in about 40 seconds you'll realize listening is the only option left to you. Don't try to cut the feed, you can't. Don't try to reach your fleet, you can't do that either. Thren reached for his comm implant and found nothing. The commander beside him shook her head, she'd already tried. I want to talk about your chorus lattice, Cross continued. Specifically, the 19-hour maintenance window your engineering core runs every 38 days to recalibrate your relay nodes. You use that window to push security updates to your encryption lattice. Elegant system. Took us 8 years to learn to read it. 2 more to learn to write in it. A pause. We wrote something last night. The silence in the hall changed color. It became the silence of 51 brilliant minds running the same calculation and arriving, one by one, at an answer none of them wanted. About 4 hours ago, every ship in the Kryvane fleet received a navigation update through standard lattice channels, issued from Fleet Command Station carries, using your own authentication protocols. Your ships accepted it without question. Why wouldn't they? It came from inside the house. Another pause. That update carries a dormant package. It's sitting in your navigation cores right now, on all 4,040 vessels larger than a Scout. It stays dormant unless we activate it. If we do, every ship in your fleet receives new instructions simultaneously, across all 51 systems, faster than any countermand you could send. Those instructions take your fleet wherever we choose. Thren did not panic. 6,000 years of doctrine didn't panic, it assessed. If this was true, his fleet had been compromised for 4 hours through channels it trusted absolutely, and no one had noticed, because the breach had worn the face of something familiar. He looked at the human on the screen and understood, with a clarity he'd never felt before, that she wasn't bluffing. We don't want your fleet, Cross said, as if she'd read the thought directly off him. We don't want your territory, your technology, your submission. We want our children. All 286 of them, unharmed, returned to Ashgrove Colony within 72 hours. She leaned in slightly. Do that, and this package disappears. Every copy, every trace. We won't speak of tonight again. The Aldebine corridor stays open to human colonization, and we open a formal diplomatic channel so the next disagreement doesn't look like this one. That's the complete list. We have no others. A final pause. Her voice dropped, quiet now. Or don't, and find out where we send your fleet. The screens went dark. In the Hall of Unbroken Victory, beneath the banners of 9 conquered species, 51 commanders sat without a word for a very long time. Then Grand Commander Thren said, to no one in particular, find me a channel to the humans. Any channel that still works. It took 6 hours to find one. They had to use a civilian trade relay. A commercial node nightglass had deliberately left untouched, like a single working phone booth left standing in a city with every other line cut. The symbolism wasn't lost on Admiral Cross when the call came through. They used the merchant relay, Colonel Voss said, almost smiling. Of course they did, Cross said. It's the only thing left that works. Put him through. Thren's face appeared on the Halcyon's main display, composed, correct, ascendancy to the bone. But Cross had spent 3 decades reading people who were working very hard not to show what they felt, and she read him clearly. He was afraid. Not of her exactly. Of the thing he didn't understand, a species that had done something no one had ever done, and done it so quietly his empire hadn't felt a thing until the moment she chose to tell them. That was the real wound. Not the capability. The patience. Admiral Cross, he said, his translator rendering flat, clean human. I'm authorized to discuss your terms. There's nothing to discuss, Cross said, almost pleasantly. The terms are the terms. Do you accept them or not? A pause. I have questions about verification. Reasonable. Full remote access to confirm package removal, once the children are safe on Ashgrove. We want you to check. We want this to be the start of trust, not the end of it. Another pause, longer. You said you want a diplomatic channel. You never offered one before. We didn't consider you worth the offer, Cross said. We're aware exactly how you filed us. Tonight is partly about revising that file. Thren studied her, eyes carrying 6 millennia of institutional memory behind them, looking out through one pair of pupils at something he couldn't yet categorize. What are you? He asked. It sounded like a genuine question. Cross considered it. We're human beings, she said. We're very young, and we're frightened most of the time, and we make terrible decisions about as often as good ones. But we love our children with a completeness that doesn't leave room for anything else. And anyone who touches them finds out very quickly what's underneath all that fear. She let it sit. 72 hours started when this call began. You have 66 left. Use them well. She cut the feed. The children came home in 61 hours. All 286 of them, aboard 2 Ascendancy transports with a single escort frigate that peeled away the instant they broke atmosphere. No ceremony. No face-saving speech. The transport set down in Ashgrove's main grain field, the only clear space large enough. The ramps lowered, and the children walked out into afternoon sunlight that smelled like wheat and turned soil and home, blinking, until the adults reached them at a dead run. The sound that rose from that field didn't translate cleanly into any language the Crivane Ascendancy possessed. Aboard the Halcyon, Admiral Cross watched the reunion on satellite feed and said nothing for a long while. Beside her, Dr. Solis finally spoke. Do we hold to it? The package removal? Every copy. Every trace. Exactly as promised. Cross didn't look away from the screen. We said what we meant. That's how trust gets built, even with them. Especially with them. They're going to spend the next decade tearing their lattice apart looking for other packages, Solis said. They won't find any. There aren't any. But the search will keep them occupied, and while it does, we'll be building. Trade channels. Diplomatic footholds. Relationships with the 9 species they've conquered. You planned past the children. We planned for the children first, Cross said, firm. Everything after that is just consequence. She glanced at the star map. The Ascendancy treats power like a fixed quantity, something you hoard and hold. We don't. We treat it like infrastructure. You build it, and then you build on top of what you built, and it grows. They've been holding what they have for 6,000 years. We've been building for 40. She turned back to the wheat field on the screen, where parents were still holding children who would carry that day for the rest of their lives. We're just getting started. The story spread the way true things do, first as rumor, then as whisper, then as a fact nobody wanted to say aloud, because saying it made it more real than some civilizations were ready for. Humanity had reached into the nervous system of the most powerful empire in known space and left a note. And the empire had read it, blinked, and given back what it had taken, because the alternative was a darkness with no visible bottom. The Marrow Concord. A loose federation of 7 species along the galaxy's inner arm, first heard the story from a Kryvane trade envoy who'd had one drink too many at a function on Kess Station. The Concord's Intelligence Council spent 3 months confirming it, probing ascendancy space, interviewing merchant captains whose navigation had gone strange for exactly 4 hours one particular cycle, pulling relay logs from along the Aldebine corridor. Everything checked out. They sent a diplomatic mission to Earth, their first direct contact with humanity. Its lead envoy, a tall, many-limbed being named 3, who spoke partly in subsonic tone and partly in careful, deliberate English learned specifically for the occasion, spent 40 minutes on formal greetings before arriving at the reason she'd come. "We want to understand you," 3 said through her translator. "What you did. How. And, more than that, why you stopped. Where you stopped. You had their fleet. You could have used it to secure the corridor, or others besides. You chose not to. We want to understand why." The Secretary General, a different woman now, cut from the same cloth as the one who'd taken that first call 3 years earlier, thought a moment before answering. "Because we didn't want dominance," she said. "We wanted our children back. Those aren't the same thing. They're not mutually exclusive. No. But the moment you use a thing like that for gain instead of protection, you've become something else. Something we don't want to be." 3 was quiet. Her subsonic tone shifted in a register the Concord's translation systems flagged as somewhere between contemplation and unease. "You built something powerful enough to end their empire as a functioning power," she said slowly, "and you used it to retrieve 286 children. Then you took it apart." "We didn't take it apart," the Secretary General said gently. "We removed it from their systems. The capability still exists. It always will. That's rather the point." A longer silence. "You want the galaxy to know you could," 3 said, "without ever doing it again. We want the galaxy to know we could, and that we chose not to, and that we'd rather be friends with everyone in it, if that's possible." A pause. "But yes. They need to know we could." The Secretary General folded her hands. "The best weapon is the one you only ever have to show, not fire." The Kryvane ascendancy did not collapse. It was too old, too vast, too deeply structured for that. But it changed the way very old things change, slowly, with resistance, with something like physical pain. A formal diplomatic channel opened between the ascendancy and Earth, as promised. Trade talks began within the year. Ascendancy forces quietly withdrew from 2 of the 9 conquered homeworlds, not from any treaty clause, but because the math had shifted. Holding 9 civilizations by force had always been expensive. No one had ever made the cost feel real before. Humanity made it feel real. The children of Ashgrove Colony grew up. They went to school, fell in love, built careers and families of their own. Most, when asked about the 61 hours they'd spent aboard an ascendancy transport, said some version of the same thing, that they had been afraid, then confused, and then. When the ramp lowered and they smelled the wheat field and heard voices they knew, flooded with something they didn't yet have a word for. One of them, a girl who'd been 6 when she was taken and who grew up to become a xenodiplomat of some renown, was asked late in her career what she thought of what humanity had done to bring her home. She considered it for a long time. "We didn't send an army," she said finally. "My mother told me that once I was old enough to understand it." She said when they took us, humanity looked at the problem the way it looks at every problem, practically, without ego, without needing to be seen doing something. They asked, what do we actually need? We need the children back safe, with the least possible loss of life, and the best possible chance at a lasting peace. And then they built the exact thing that got them that result. Nothing more. She paused. The ascendancy expected rage. They knew how to handle rage. They'd been handling it for 6,000 years. What they got instead was patience. Precision. A people who'd quietly decided, a long time before, that if this moment ever came, they'd be ready for it. She shook her head slowly. That's what frightened them. Not the weapon. The patience behind it. The willingness to wait 12 years for something they might never need. Is that what humanity is? The interviewer asked. Patient? She smiled. A complicated smile, shaped by 60 years spent in a galaxy still learning, even now, what humanity was. Humanity is a species that will wait as long as it has to, she said, and love as hard as it can, and build as quietly as it must. And when something we love is taken from us, she paused, we don't get angry. We get to work. And we don't stop until the work is done. Somewhere in the dark between 51 worlds, in the nervous system of an ancient and powerful empire, there was no longer any trace of what had once been there. But the memory remained. The memory always remains. And in the wheat fields of Ashgrove Colony, in the long gold light of a late afternoon, 286 people who had once been children, grown now, with children of their own beside them, walked through the grain while the planet smelled like soil and sunlight and something with no name in any alien tongue, but that every human being in the galaxy knew, instantly, by feel. It smelled like home. And somewhere out past the stars, the galaxy had learned something it would not soon forget. Do not take what humans love. Because humanity does not send armies. Humanity sends something worse.